Welcome back to the Red Path. Today, we're going to take another look at arguably the best World Eaters unit in the book, the Red Butchers. We're going to go through my thoughts on their datasheet, the applicable buffs that can go on them, how best to build your butchers, how best to deploy them, and any tricks and tips I've got in actually using them. Before we jump into the full analysis, I just want to take a quick second to thank you for all your support over the last few years. And to those new to the channel, please consider subscribing on YouTube, jumping into our Discord, and if you really want to help support us, consider checking out our Patreon program. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. Red Butchers are built in-game by using a 2CP stratagem to upgrade a squad of Chaos Terminators. With the CP spent, we're looking at 5 to 10 3-wound models with 5 inches of movement at toughness 4, strength 5 base. They hit on 3s in shooting and combat and have a 2-up 5-up with leadership 10 on the champion. Butchers upgrades them from strength 4 to strength 5 and gives them blood for the blood god to allow them to fight twice in any fight phase. Whilst an expensive purchase at the front end, especially in the Nephilim economy, I would strongly argue it is 100% worth it and crucial for a World Eater to mitigate the lack of buffs other legions have access to. It's also worth noting that the Butchers have the core keyword, their infantry, and must take the Mark of Khorne upgrade, but they don't have access to icons. So with that laid out, let's look at the best ways to overcharge these beasts. As mentioned, Butchers are infantry with the core keyword as well as mandatory Mark of Khorne. This combination unlocks several key improvements that can and often should be applied to them. On the screen now should be a full visual of stratagems that they can be buffed with, but they can additionally be helped by the Dark Apostles' prayers, especially Illusory Supplication, Lords, Princes, Exalted Champions, and Abaddon's rerolls all apply to Terminators and especially Butchers. They can also take a relic for 1 CP, but this is basically limited to the Black Mace, the Blade of the Relentless, and the Black Rune of Damnation. The 9th edition Chaos Space Marine Codex competitive scene has mostly focused on large 10-body bricks of unkillable Terminators, and whilst Red Butchers can't quite reach the toughness heights of other legions, no access to toughness 5 or regeneration, no feel no pain, etc., we do somewhat mitigate this by actually being seriously killy. Probably the killiest unit in the entire game, quite frankly, and that's not an exaggeration. At such an expense, 330-ish points plus 2 CP, I 100% support upgrading them with the Black Rune. This is effectively a 17% buff to being wounded, coupled with a small bit of anti-psychic deterrence, and it really makes them a problem for enemies to deal with. 3-wound models that can't be hit on better than a 4 with no rerolls automatically halves all enemy hits, then -1 to wound. 99% of the time means they can't be wounded on 2s ever. Blood Angels, for example, can circumvent this, however being +1 to wound on the charge. On top of this, the datasheet power of 2+ armor with Armor of Contempt means they will save against power swords on 4s and in cover 4s versus Melter as well. I'll talk about this more in the deployment section, but if Butchers are being deployed on the table, and I think they almost always should be, they should almost always benefit from Apoplectic Frenzy, and I'll show you how best to get the most from that with a TTS demo later. Access to some form of rerolls can be incredible too. With their combi bolters exploding in rounds 1 and 2 from the Wantons, the rerolls will always allow you to pump up their shot damage. Against non-Armor of Contempt armies, they can add 6 inches in range of -1 AP to these with the Demon Shell stratagem. In combat, some of the key and most efficient stratagems to consider are Fury of Khorne. If facing a tough unit that would be wounded on 4s or worse, or has transhuman, the volume of attacks Red Butchers put out means a solid percentage will auto-wound. If performed whilst in wanton slaughter, you also gain the exploding dice, so will often wound almost as many times as you hit. Stoke the Nails. Stoke is one of the most critical strats for Butchers. At strength 5 base, with +1 from the Mark of Khorne and +1 from Accursed Weapons, Stoke will put them at strength 8, or if you're running Chain and Power Fist, strength 10. These are both important breakpoints. Finally, Kill Main Burn. The ability to consolidate an additional 3 inches is absolutely brutal on Red Butchers. Coupled with their double activation, it not only mitigates their slow 5-inch movement, but makes them one of the fastest infantry units in the game, with the opportunity to move 18 inches in the fight phase towards the nearest enemy model. Next, let's take a look at how to build your squad. Termies cost 33 points per model, but as World Eaters they have a 15-point tax on the squad, meaning they cost 36 if you're running a 5-man or 37.5 for a 10-man. The mark tax gives them +1 strength when charging or charged, which is incredibly potent on the butchers. I'll go over the most common build I see, the build I personally take, and a couple of alternatives. The most common build is a large squad of 8 to 10 butchers with the rune and all with accursed weapons and combi bolters. The larger size maximises the efficiency of any buffs they receive, as well as presenting more wounds for the enemy to chew through. The double fight phase is especially efficient on large blobs as they cover more real estate with their movement and will be more likely to massacre what they hit. This costs between 279 and 345 points. My personal build is 10 butchers. With the rune, I throw in 2 heavy flamers and 4 combi flamers, one of which is on the champion who also possesses a chain fist. The rest have accursed weapons. I discovered early on how powerful our flamers are. Having 6d6 auto hitting weapons equals to 29 hits, varying between strength 5 -1 and strength 4 AP 0, with an additional 8 bolters at -1 to hit and 16 bolters hitting normally. This is some serious DACA. In addition, after some Discord discussion, I've taken to really enjoying the Chain Fist champion. Many times he's been my lone survivor, and having access to 10 anti-tanker tanks can be crucial in the late game, regardless of the -1 to hit. My build does cost 380 points, so it's really pushing the envelope resource-wise, but it has yet to fail me on the tabletop. Other popular builds include running 5-man butcher squads with the Black Mace, a discount murder train, a fist squad, 10 butchers, can take 2 chain fists and 6 power fists for some absurd damage output. Then another build I've toyed with, but not ran yet competitively, is kind of a combination of these. 5 butchers, 1 with a chain fist, 3 with power fists, and the Black Mace on the champion. The issue I have with running 5 butchers is that their effectiveness can suffer very quickly against armies with a solid mortal wound output or who knows what they can do and will kite them. Nevertheless, success can be had with any use if well commanded. Okay, so let's talk about deployment. Chaos Terminators come with the ability to deep strike naturally, deploy on the battlefield, sit inside a few transports, 5 to a Land Raider or Dreadclaw, and up to 10 in a Charybdis or Spartan, and a few of the aircraft have transport capacity too. And they can also be strategically reserved. The situations you want to pay CP for reserving them are as close to 0 as to warrant no discussion. I honestly can't think of one. There is definitely a meme play in sitting them inside a drop pod of either kind, but they'll still rely on a 7-inch charge at best, turn 1, and that's not something I'd gamble on. Unless and until Land Raiders become just a little more efficient, I probably wouldn't put them inside a deployed transport either. The 3-inch disembark move is nice, but isn't likely to capitalise on much to warrant the risk of it ending up as a handicap. Prior to this book, the deliberation was always whether to deep strike for safety or not. With a smaller army opening up more obscure access, the rune and illusory supplication, it's often quite possible to start Terminators on the table now. Perhaps against the Nid's double harpy list or Tower with their 2 flyers, I'd definitely consider deep striking, but in 90% of games, I'm going to recommend starting them on the board. The way I tend to try and deploy them is as follows. Apoplectic Frenzy will grant them a 5-inch pre-game move, so I want to make sure that there is space behind some line-of-sight blocking terrain within 5 inches, so if I go second, they can become fully protected, but if I go first, they will march up the board ready to slaughter. I like to make sure their 5-inch move will also leave them within 6 inches of the Dark Apostle and Abaddon or any other buff caster, so they don't miss out on the improvements in the command phase, regardless of what direction they travel. Every turn your butchers aren't 1, killing stuff, or 2, tanking firepower is an inefficient turn. You don't want to make them easy targets, but you want to think about putting them somewhere where your opponent will have to extend to touch them, leaving them vulnerable to swift flanking assaults from your possessed or jump troops. I've had games where my butchers have killed 40% of my enemy's army by themselves, and games where they never even touched the enemy, but absorbed so much firepower the rest of my forces were able to overpower them instead, being relatively untouched. For me, This strength always comes from deploying and moving them in such a way as to catch your opponent's eye, but also to be a challenge to wipe. Finally, let's look at some of the coolest tricks we can pull off with our butchers. To start, one of the biggest weaknesses on paper of Terminators is their movement. World Eaters can circumvent this somewhat in two ways: the frenzy pre-game move and the double fire activation, especially with kill main burn. In an ideal situation with a charge target, at the end of your first turn with butchers, they could move up to 42 inches. That's 5 inches pre-game, a 5-inch normal move, a full 12-inch on the dice charge, but with access to +2 from Abaddon and a Violent Urgency Warlord, then 2 pile-ins at 3 inches each, and then 2 6-inch consolidates. Occasionally you'll find a nice springboard charge target in the mid-table, and it can be profitable to multi-charge it, one unit being the butchers, the second something that will probably kill it as well, a squad of berserkers say. In this situation, it can be best to overrun with the Terminators. That means maxing their charge move to get as far forward into the enemy lines as possible. Then you activate first with the berserkers and kill the target. Then the butchers use their double activation to move their full 18 with kill main burn to get right into the heart of the enemy. You do have to move toward the nearest enemy model on a model by model basis as well at each of those pile-ins and consolidates, but clarify with your opponent what you're doing and that can just speed up that process. Another excellent piece of tech they have access to is the enemy fight phase. The normal shenanigans can occur of course, but there is a limitation that they must be eligible to fight in both of their opportunities. So make sure to use that first pile-in and consolidate after surviving a charge to position well, as because they did not declare a charge, they are eligible to fight anything that they are engaged with. This allows them to lawn mow their way through multiple units on your opponent's turn. For instance, in a recent game versus Sisters of Battle, they held like champs versus a Repentia charge, then piled in around them, slaughtered them, then I put 6-inch consolidate on them to end up just within an inch of 2 enemy HQs and a Battle Sister squad. On the next activation, those 3 units were removed from the battlefield. It was glorious. Always remember to try and get the whole unit on a defensible piece of terrain with light and, if possible, heavy cover. This puts them at a 1+ save versus range, well, 0+ with Armour of Contempt really, and if they are targeted by a charge, can either overwatch on 5s, and that's actually very strong versus things like Repentia, or they can gain +1 to hit in combat by setting to defend. One thing your opponent never wants is more accurate butchers. It's important to note that every model must be on defensible terrain to activate this, however. I've seen some high level players get this wrong, so always be sure to double check the rules. Alright, that about wraps up my thoughts on the Red Butchers. I really think they're one of the best units in the Codex, on par with Abaddon. They outkill any fully buffed Invincible Terminator squad, including Creations of Bile, in prolonged combat. They can one-shot the Silent King. They can survive and defeat Gaz. They nicely counter alpha units like Repentia, and they add a huge amount of resilience and mobility to an army that sorely needs it. So, I hope you found something helpful in this breakdown, and until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and make sure to spend that CP to kill main burn.